If I timed it right, that means that we can finally start a panel. Let's put...
It's 2:59, so yeah.
Yeah, I timed it right. Presenter view with...
Why wouldn't you guys come forward?
I was standing in the back.
There we go. And I can put this... So... For one, I wanted to make sure that the projector would be working and the sound would be working. And for two, I wanted at least to give a little refresher for the project I'm talking about, Missing Out, Making an Animated Project, which has been released about 2 years ago now. And it's quite interesting because I wanted to look back at it and actually talk about the production. I've had lots of questions about how the whole thing was made. Making a 15 minutes long animated project is quite a complex task, and I want to talk a bit about it as a series of things I've learned and a series of things that I can push on future projects. And also want to talk about it for other reasons. So I want you to go back in the past. I don't know if, how many people have been to Nightmare Nights 2017? Just one? Well, technically two, including me. So a little bit of backstory for Nightmare Nights 2017. This is how they announced it. This was supposed to be at the basically a convention in Dallas, usually around Halloween, around what Ciderfest is now around. And they announced like 2017 would be their last year. It was not that they had declining attendance. It's that they had increasing attendance, but they wanted to end on a higher note. And thus they announced that 2017 would be the last one. And me, I had a job, and this was the first time I could actually afford to go to other conventions, and the two I could do per year, that was it. And when I was told, yeah, this is the last one, this is the one you're going to be able to make too, because people kept saying it was a great time. So 2017, I get there to the Crown Plaza Hotel, incredible hotel. It was, I love the view there. It's massive. It's and I got to finally experience it. It was quite interesting because it was right after losing my job, so it was a weird note of this is the last one, but also I don't know what's going to happen to me afterwards. It felt like the end, and we had the premiere for the Luna's Determination, another animation of mine, and at the end of the panel, right before the closing ceremonies, they had a little panel where the whole idea was, let's talk about all the memories we've had of the convention since the beginning, and a lot of people would come on stage and talk about their experiences, and I was there, and I had none of those experiences. I was basically told by people about things that they've experienced, but I could never experience myself, and it stayed in my head for a long time. It stayed in my head a long time, the idea that I missed out on a lot of those things, and I kept wondering, like, what if I had a time machine or just a way to be able to visit those past pony conventions? And then a couple of questions came to my mind. What would I do about the things that I know now? How would I work with that information? For example, we had some members that turned out to be not very good people, and I'm thinking, like, do I pretend to be nice to them, knowing full well all the things that I know now? Do I pretend I don't know what's going to be the next spoiler about the next events that are going to happen to the characters? What would I do in this situation? And around that time, I was discussing with some people, and the most obvious dawned on me. Starlight Glimmer has never seen the Golden Oak Library. This very, very effective Photoshop is a way to...
That's one vector.
This is... I'm trying to fool you a bit about that, but I realized at that point, Starlight has never seen the Golden Oak Library. She has never been part of those first 4 seasons that a lot of us look at as being the golden years. And I was thinking, what if I did something around that? What if I did a story about Starlight Glimmer and those times? And around that, I was thinking, like, what can we make? If I'm going to make a project, I'm going to have to assess what kind of resources I have access to, what kind of things I can make. So I started making some kind of plans, like what would be obtainable as a project. So I had a couple of ideas, around 8 to 11 minutes long, because I was realizing, like, I could make the Fall of Sunset Shimmer with the resources I had. So this is something achievable for me. About Starlight and Twilight, because I realized that Starlight has a lot to self-reflect on Twilight and vice versa. I was thinking this is a good pairing for that kind of animation, and I thought that would also be very good because I know someone who'd be great at Twilight Sparkle. About nostalgia, but not pandering, we've seen so many movies where the whole idea is that they're gonna use nostalgia as a currency to try to make themselves feel a bit more grand by trying to refer to things that you already like. And I was thinking, like, I want to make a story about the influence of nostalgia, but without being too guilty of doing that kind of things that they do. So it was very tricky to balance it out already, and using a better production approach, because one of the problems I had with the beginning of Harmony is that a lot of production is kind of inconsistent in quality and production. Some of them would use matte paintings that would just paint over. Some of them would use a pre-rendered scenes with in CG with ray tracing that didn't match too much the look. It would have some real-time renders that were added on top, and the look was not as consistent as I was hoping. I was trying to match the colors with some color grading that was not to my taste. Was quite a mess. I was thinking, like, I would like to have something that's a lot more reasonable as an approach, something that you can look at and feels consistent because it's all done using the same pipeline. So I started making some things. I started making some models of houses in Ponyville because I did some stuff in Canterlot. I did some stuff in the ancient Alagon Kingdom, but nothing in Ponyville. In Ponyville, one of the problems with their houses and all their architecture, there's a lot of organic stuff. I cannot just use the same kind of arches I would have for Canterlot. I had to make that kind of detail, find a way to make those thatched roofs, which was also quite a weird challenge. Model a couple of things, trying to find the right shading, was trying to think, well, this is going to be mostly at night, so let's make it good at night. Let's see how it's going to look with the light sources coming from outside inside the house, and how it's going to affect the look. Started modeling the Golden Oak Library. It was quite interesting because there's not a lot of references to what it looks like from other angles, so I mostly had to extrapolate from the front view, and that's it. And while I was working on the tree, I was thinking, like, what's the best way to make an holographic tree? And just making it glow is not the best approach. And I was thinking a lot at school with the ways we had to try to replicate 3D models. We would basically just project a photo of the object on the geometry and try to make it line up. So, and they have photogrammetry, where the whole idea is that you let a computer figure out all those points on different photos. And I was thinking, what if I had that, but in this case, I already know what the 3D model looks like. So I would take photos from the Golden Oak Library at different points of time, different lighting, different tones. What if I projected those photos on a blank 3D model to get that look? So I started making some, basically some fake photos of what the main six would look like in front of a tree, some from the inside that would make it look like a glow, and it's pretty loud. Different times, so you'd have, for example, sunset during the day, during the night. You'd have all of those views to have, and the whole idea was that the color temperature would be very inconsistent as a bit of a bonus, because I was expecting it to look like it was made out of different sources that were stitched. I was kind of inspired by how, for example, some people do film restoration, where they would take different sources to try to restore the best they could with what they had. For example, if you've ever heard of Harmy's this specialized edition of Star Wars, the whole idea is that he took a lot of sources to try to make the best one. I would take stills from people who had production stills that he could have. It would basically try to stitch them with some footage he got from some film scans, the official Blu-ray, just to try to get something as accurate as possible. The idea of stitching things out of those mismatched sources was so... it felt really crazy as an idea, but I felt like it would be really cool as a way to show Starlight trying to replicate the Golden Oak Library out of those photos with the magic. So I had a little demo that I had, and there we go. Sorry, my internet is a bit slow, but I made a very small demo how the idea of projecting it would work, and I didn't even render it on that laptop. I rendered it on a second-hand laptop that was given to me because I needed a laptop on... Around Christmas, when I was visiting my mom, I was thinking, like, if I can render it on a potato, it should be fine. So I just let the computer run in the middle of the night, just telling my mom, like, if it makes noise, just ignore it. And the whole idea was that I wanted to see how well you could do that kind of graphic thing. So one of the things, it looked a bit like this as a demo. And the whole idea is that you project those photos, and the whole idea is there's no other lighting. It's basically just pure white with those sources, and then you have the volumetrics on top added. And the whole idea is that you'd project it from the photo as a projector. Finding a way to make it work was crazy because the volumetrics had to be rendered separately. You're going to notice for some fast movements the color kind of shift because of the weird approach I had to make the colors work, because the volumetrics in Eevee are only handled in black and white. So I was thinking, like, I'm going to do a pass of the red, green, and blue separately. And I was doing a little test to see how things would line up, and turned out it worked well. It really felt like some kind of weird magic light show, and I thought that would be perfect for Starlight. So I had this, and I had... Give it a moment. Seriously? Okay, so rundown of the original story at the time, because the whole idea is while I was doing tests to see how is it going to work. I was also working on a script to make things work. So here's the rundown of the story at the time. So it starts with a nice view of Ponyville at night. Things are going well. The little kids are going to bed. The adults are going to stay a bit behind. And then you see Twilight was asking, where's Starlight? I haven't seen her in a long time. And Spike says, the old library. So Twilight goes to fly to see that. And she arrives to see Starlight, who's there with a couple of photos. And she's asking, like, what are you doing here? And Starlight is really, really not open to show what she's actually showing at the time, because she's very self-conscious about the project that she's working on, and she doesn't want to show yet, but she realizes, I have to show. And then she reveals the holographic tree, what it looks like, and Twilight just points out, this is beautiful, I love it. And turns out that when Twilight points out a little flaw with it, it just breaks. And the whole idea is that she points out, oh, I realized that you missed out on the whole thing, you feel bad about it, I'm sorry. And Starlight is kind of losing her mind at the time, and she realizes, like, I'll never be able to replicate the real deal. And at some point she has a conversation where she talks about her feelings, and she admits to Twilight, like, you know, I'm sorry I couldn't be there, don't be, I could be there, what? And then she uses the cutie map with a new version of a spell. And the two arrive in the past, and Twilight goes like, you can't change your course of time like this. What do you mean I can just walk inside, introduce myself to the past you, join you with your friends? I'll meet the other me and just try to convince the other me to be reasonable. I'll probably be a bit better than you, because I know myself a bit better. Twilight goes, Starlight, don't do this. It's not like I'll alter much the course of history by befriending you earlier in the past. Maybe I could even make things a bit better for you. And Starlight has never seen those time travel movies because it never goes well. But that's... Twilight asks, like, what if you're wrong? You think I can't be careful? Well, your actions, well-intentioned, might backfire. And Starlight is still in it. And Twilight goes like, don't do this, please, because she's about to open, because the party is right behind, and she can't really convince her otherwise. And Starlight just looks inside and is like, do you want to risk being part of stories you already know the outcome? She is, what do you mean? Those things we did together were special because we know how it would turn out. They would feel very shallow. You already knew the punchline to all the jokes. Starlight just looks down and says, like, you know, I think you're right. I can't do that. And they go back home. Then there's a close-up with an acorn in the tree that's growing. So they go... and the whole idea is that they just go back home. Camera pans up. Pans down. And it's gone. And then you have the dialogue where you have Twilight talking about the acorn. She mentions a couple of other things that were not in the final. For example, the idea that Applejack mentioned Granny Spitz saw the acorn being planted. And she says, like, you know, let's build a new future. So let's plant it together. Let's see what's going to happen. And then they plant it, and that's the end. Do you see the problem with this story?
That's pretty straightforward.
No, it's not just straightforward. It's boring.
It's
And-
euphemism because
Well, the whole idea is taking like that's all I can really afford because with the pipeline it's already 8 pages long. I was thinking like I'm gonna have lots of things to do. I don't really have much in terms of rendering power. I don't know how I'm gonna be able to make it all work together. And I realized like I can't release that. It's gonna be the most boring thing ever. So in terms of limitations of production, one of the problems I had was that I was trying to use the part that went well with the production of the beginning of Harmony. The idea that I could actually integrate characters in 2D with the environment and actually have the camera match perfectly because they were set in the same space. And when I mean it, I mean it. You actually had the 3D model that was imported next to the characters that could actually fly the camera around. And it was not for all the shots. It was basically the best case scenario for those shots. But you had some issues with just using that approach. For one, it's done in a native renderer, so no anti-aliasing, so weird aliasing artifacts that you need to get rid of by rendering bigger and then downsizing the pixels. The whole idea is that you basically just get rid of the staircase by just multi-sampling. But if you release at 4K, you'd basically need to render at 8K, which would be a nightmare out of it. No dynamic lighting option. If you put a light source, it wouldn't actually trace shadows. No reflections either, so if you had any kind of metal, it wouldn't reflect any environment around. And I was thinking like it's probably not going to be too much of an issue for that, but I was thinking like if I have some nice light sources out of the houses in Ponyville, they would actually look like light sources. It would look really gross. Like think of early 90s CG demos and very early 2000s video games with very bad lighting. Basically that. You can get away with bake lighting. Bake lighting, think of it like you have a model with shadows or traced on, and you basically tell it, that's the texture now, that's it. And the problem is that you can't move it anymore, so you had to have a scene where the light sources will never, ever move, which wasn't too bad for a scene at night with all the lights already turned on, but for the holographic tree, you couldn't do anything crazy with it. This would be a nightmare. And this one is... So that was the approach I had in terms of projection. The whole idea for the beginning of Harmony is that I would project those scenes on a sphere. Let's zoom out to see a bit how it breaks. And there we go.
Oh.
So you know in video games where they show when you fly the camera around?
yeah.
I was thinking like the dialogue scene that they have between Starlight and Twilight would basically be around the tree, and you wouldn't fly the camera too much. So maybe I could get away with that.
Like you couldn't see it in the final product.
Yeah, and I was thinking like this would be the somewhat acceptable way to do it, but it's not the most optimal way. And I have other problems. There we go. So problem number one, because the other one was problem zero. So Toon Boom has a way to integrate Maya if you want to have anything a bit more fancy, but it creates a new scene for every frame of the scene. So 24 frames per second for a scene that might be from maybe 10 megabytes, maybe 500 megabytes. And if you have to create the whole new scene in your temp in your solid state drive, it will wreck it. It's going to take a long time to just copy it, because the whole idea is it copies it, translates everything, puts a camera there at the position and renders it, and then grabs a render out of it. It needs to restart Maya for every frame, and the best I could do out of Maya with that kind of thing was 30 seconds just loading on a solid state drive. This is a lot that you need to add on top of your render time. Windows doesn't know what to do to get rid of those temp files. Sometimes if you reboot, sometimes you're going to get rid of it, sometimes not. It might wreck my SSD even more. Maya's rendering is also not very good for my kind of production because CPU rendering is good, but it expects you to have multiple computers to work in parallel. It doesn't expect just one indie production that doesn't even expect accuracy. It's basically if you have a VFX studio or an animated movie studio, Maya's pretty good, but and you know only one license of Toon Boom. I had a decent price for one license, but if you needed multiple licenses just to be able to render, because you need multiple computers to render, given the sheer scale of it, it'd be pretty horrible. So, given all those limitations I was taking, this is not viable at all. Problem 2, GPU rendering is also not a very good thing. So for the kids who might not remember what cryptocurrency is, think of it like Sudokus. It's basically money that's even more fake than real money. And they need to buy GPUs and make them idle for I don't know how long just to be able to produce that fake currency, which means that if you wanted to get some GPUs, it would be a nightmare. And I wanted to get a GPU, so what could I do? Like, I had an old RX 570 I had for like $200. It was like already cheap. It was a deal for a card that doesn't do ray tracing. I can't outsource it to other people because of the sheer data and the sheer scale of those Ponyville models. Think of it like 500 megabytes just for the model and the textures, and then you also need to retrieve a lot of other aspects. So just sending it back and forth just to get some renders would be a nightmare. CPU rendering is even worse. So there's an alternative that was finally getting around, the idea of using Eevee. Think of Eevee a bit like a video game renderer on steroids. It's not as accurate. For example, those reflections for the water, they use screen space reflections. Think of it like if you play, for example, video games where they have reflections, but if you point to the reflection, they start to fade out. Part of it is mostly just, it's called screen space reflection because it just reflects the pixels that you see. And it's a very effective way because you've already rendered those pixels and you basically just need to transpose them. It works, but the problem is that if you want anything that's accurate, you'll need to cheat a bit. They have probes at least to help. So if I knew how to work around it and expect it to be less accurate, which it's My Little Pony, it doesn't need to be photoreal reflections. People won't complain too much if the reflections of water next to Twilight are not exactly there. Another problem though, Toon Boom doesn't support Blender, at least didn't support at the time. Maya doesn't support Eevee, and Maya's alternative to Eevee is pretty bad. It's basically just a viewport, and you know how SFM is an old software that has also limitations, for example, reflections are... Yes!
That's all I need to say.
SFM is a software from, what, 2013? It was good at the time.
It's 30 bit. It's like 20.
It's still great, especially with Blender.
It
does not.
It's the problem with SFM is that it's an old software and there's not
The
a lot.
shadow systems are crap and has no lighting.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So
that is true,
think of Maya's renderer being basically that kind of renderer, because the real-time one for the viewport, they have Arnold as default, but the thing takes forever. And for example, for the False Sunset Shimmer, I actually had to use that renderer for those real-time segments, because I was thinking like the sheer scale of the renders would be massive for me. So I can't use that. So I was inspired by the Dijkstraflex. If you look at old movies with like Star Wars, for example, the special effects, the whole idea is that, hey Charlie!
On a dinosaur!
Talking about dinosaurs, old special effects!
Yep.
So,
And the chickens and the unicorns.
so back in the days when they wanted to do special effects with more than one model, what they would do is they would replicate the same camera movement for multiple passes. And the whole idea is that since everything was computer controlled, you could actually replicate that movement perfectly every single time and just stack up those. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, what about Jurassic Park?
Jurassic Park is a lot of animatronics and a lot of CG. It's just a very clever use of switching between the two for the needs that they have. They did an incredible job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stay sane, you people. Stay safe.
But the whole idea that I was thinking is, okay, I do the animation in Toon Boom, I have the camera that has a movement, and basically I just export that camera movement for the scene in Blender, and it would be fine. It would stack up because the movement would be perfect. Another problem, Toon Boom doesn't export the camera natively. There's a tool to export a JSON. I was looking, is there a way to import that JSON in Blender? No! It's basically that code. I was thinking, okay, that's code I can modify if I want to export an OBJ or an FBX. Could I make it export an OBJ or an FBX camera and import in Blender? And then I tried to see if I could, and I realized, oh, I'm not that kind of coder. But at least there's something. And then I realized that one of the problems is that the camera coordinate that Toon Boom has is also a mess. Because I was thinking, okay, it's just X, Y, Z in some position, and that's it. So it multiplies by -2 on that one. It multiplies, this one just multiplies by 1, but it transposes the Y to as the Z. The Z is multiplied by 2.666 for some reason. I don't know why. And it's back in the Y. The rotation is also flipped and inverted. When I figured it out, I was feeling like I was just discovering some kind of clue to an enigma. The whole thing was weird. I was thinking, like, I finally found a way, and the whole thing was very simple. I put a cube, I put the camera in the middle, and I started moving the camera back and forth to try to see how they match in terms of movement. I ended up making an Excel spreadsheet to try to see if I could use those values and transpose them. I was thinking, I'm not going to open up Excel just to be able to transpose those values every single time. So, and I also found out the problem. Toon Boom doesn't export all frames if there's no movement. I was thinking, well, that's not too bad if I just take the previous frame, but I was thinking, like, I like to just take the row value to just know exactly the frame and then get the position. It would be much easier than to try to code something out of it. So the solution was very, very simple. There's a code that just tells it not to write the new value if the new value is the same. I just get rid of it entirely. Other problem, it doesn't export FOV change. For example, if you want to do a crash zoom in a scene, since you only have the FOV of the scene at the beginning, you couldn't do that kind of crash zoom. And doing dollies is good, but if you couldn't do zooms for an animation, you'd feel a bit limited. And it took me forever, but I found somehow in Googling that piece of code that it actually exported the FOV. I'm still not entirely sure how I found it, but I found it. I was thinking, this is good. And then I just added the code to get that part. Blender has a tool called animation nodes, where basically I just take the JSON, think of the JSON like a text file data, basically just decipher the order of those values and tell it, okay, that's the X, that's the Y, that's the Z, and then use those conversions that I had earlier to just export it and import a JSON. And then I managed at that point to actually have something as a test to see if it would work. And the test I did was very, very simple. I think it wants me to. There. I was just thinking, okay, the camera lines up, the shadow lines up, and I was thinking, this is the weird movement, but there's translation in all 3 axes, there's rotation in all 3 axes, it works. That was the proof I could actually make it using that tool. And it made it so much easier because instead of having to recreate the whole scene every single time, I could actually just export a camera and just render the plate, and that was it. And it wasn't entirely that, there was also other problems, but most of the problems were finally fixed. So I also found out, well, since everything is set in 3D space, you can actually have reflections by just flipping the 3D model, well, the 2D model set in 3D space. You could also have shadows, which you saw earlier, by just skewing and just flattening the floor. It would make it so much easier, because sometimes you look at cartoons where you have a character that's reflecting in the floor and you look at the feet and they don't even line up because the feet were drawn in 2D and try to flip those feet into 2D. Sometimes they even had the problem with My Little Pony, so I finally found a way to fix it easily. It's not perfect. For example, if you look at the reflection of her face, but I was thinking it's going to be a shiny but slightly rough floor. Yeah.
Have you made your own models?
Yep, that was entirely made by myself in Toon Boom. I did take some inspiration to how I think they did it for the movie, but I didn't have access to the models from the movie, so a lot of it was guesswork. I had dual cartoonists actually show me a bit how their rig worked, but they wouldn't share for, well, I totally respect their desires to not share those models, but at least I got some insight on how they did theirs. In their case, they used a master controller, which was basically weird magic that I don't personally understand. In my case, it's basically just tricking things to be in 3D space with some weird masking. I also had Tearawai giving me some insight to how he did the blinks. That also helped me a lot for how they handle the blinks and also the mount cycles. So I was thinking, like, a lot of it just works. And yeah, those rigs are basically just fixes of the models I had since the Fall of Sunset Shimmer. Lots of things I've learned since that I'm really glad I got to fix. So now we're talking. We actually can get the project started. And I was thinking, well, if I can have a story where you actually have Starlight joining the main six in the early days, I could actually have something a lot more interesting. And one of the things I wanted to have was the idea of just Starlight seeing, because she realizes that she can't really alter the flow too much, but she has to still see her friends getting hurt. So I could actually have the scenes where she sees her friends make bad decisions because she doesn't, she can't just pretend like she knows the clue to everything because it's going to mess up with the friendship lessons, that all of those things. So just being able to actually show those things happen was very interesting. I also did a little fix because remember earlier when I was talking about Starlight being pushed on the holographic tree she was working on? The weirdest thing is that I got inspired by the silliest of sources for where I should get what I should get to fix a problem. Remember that episode of American Dad?
My God, he's a figure skater.
So I was thinking, okay, can you imagine if they did it the other way like I did? Where you have basically Stan be just there, and Francine is basically asking, like, what are you doing here? And for like a good solid minute, he doesn't want to tell, and so it's like, okay, and then he does his figure skating. I was thinking, that would be boring. So what if I take that bit where she's pressing her on what's happening, and then flipped it? What if she just arrives when the holographic tree is getting started? And then I also realized, since I can actually fly a camera in 3D space, I had that whole sequence where you had Starlight getting the cutie map. And the whole idea was basically a couple of separate shots. I was thinking, like, what if I could actually fly the camera around in 3D space? And the whole idea is that since I could... And all the idea is that since I can actually fly a camera in 3D space, I have the feel, you don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but you have the nice reveal, because at first I'm kind of playing with the idea that people think it might still be in Canterlot. The camera still pans, and she plays, and then you see the route, and then it transitions to Golden Oak Library, which I thought was really cool that they actually did it that way in the show, because I could do that kind of transition. Thank you, DHX. There was a scene that I had early where you basically had Starlight being asked, like, what are you looking forward to for the Wonderbolt's Young Flyer competition? And she basically said, like, I can't wait to see Rarity just participate in the race. And all the ponies are just laughing at it, saying, that's silly, that would never happen. Optimization, because one of the... Actually, that slide was a bit later, but optimization, because one of the things is that 15 minutes of things that you have to render in a renderer that might take between 5 to 15 minutes per frame to render, you need to cut in a couple of ways to make in a way where people don't notice the cuts too much. So one of the things, for example, for the holographic tree, there was a separate model for the whenever you'd see the holographic tree and whenever you'd see the characters and you wouldn't see the holographic tree at the same time. The whole idea is that instead of just having the tree that was very complex to render, I would basically just have a point light with the proper color temperature, the proper intensity, and you wouldn't notice too much. And then I have some cards with some glows behind to match. And it worked pretty well, and the reasoning I had was it's a dialogue scene where they're going to talk. And for example, if I want to have something a bit longer or want to insert something, it might affect the flow of the scene. And also, since the whole thing required a lot of layering, because the tree had the glow, the scene of Ponyville behind, the volumetric glow next to it, 3 separate passes, plus the 3 colors for the volumetrics. It would be a nightmare to do for every single shot, so just having that one for at once would be a lot easier. So it made my life a bit easier to have that kind of approach. I also managed optimizing the set for the interior of the Golden Library, because the final scene was taking like, I might have to do last minute tweaks that might change everything, because it's very, very important as a scene, but if I realize that the close-up is too far, I might need to re-render everything. So the global illumination was completely faked. You see a spotlight that's shining on the floor, and if you had to ray trace the whole thing, you need to calculate all the rays that you'd get out of that. And I was realizing there's no way I'm going to render that. So instead I just had a spotlight that would shine it, and to fake that global illumination I had another spotlight, in this case an area light, that would point from that surface and glow and everything else. And it looks pretty good, and it renders a lot easier than everything else. Cold models away from the camera, so in this case, since everything else was dark, I didn't have to worry too much about that kind of bouncing light. All the houses behind would be taken out entirely, because I had some cards with less memory. I was thinking like I can't hit too far the memory usage. Rendered in 3 computers because this was very tense. I had the laptop, the 2 desktops rendering parallel. The heat in my apartment was horrible, just making sure that everything really rendered in time. And just all of that just to make sure that tweaks at the last minute would not be a nightmare. So part 6, casting. And casting a project is quite interesting in the pony fandom, because you don't have just the one Twilight Sparkle. You have a lot of people that you can go with. So I started the main 3. Twilight Sparkle, I'm Shadow was offering like, do you want to work with me on a project about Twilight Sparkle? And I was thinking, dude, it should be perfect. Spike was interesting with Kate Bug, because I remembered like 5 years before she sent an audition to Dr. Wolf for Therapy with Spike, and she basically did a redo of one of the scenes for Spike from Dragon Quest. And I thought, yeah, she sounds pretty good. And when I asked her, she basically kind of laughed at me, saying like, oh, you found that audition? Sure, I'm gonna go. And she was kind of surprised I would go with that, because it's not the main character she's known for. Same thing with Starlight. Was thinking at first, I'm Shadow was offering to go with Starlight, and she realized she was struggling with Starlight and also Twilight. And I was thinking like, focus on Twilight, things are gonna go well. And then someone just pointed out like, oh, remember Anna Chloem, your Princess Celestia from the Fall Sunset Shimmer? She's also a very good Starlight Glimmer. And it felt like a weird scoop, like an information people would not know, because it was like a very well-hidden secret. I was thinking like, this is good. We have our Starlight as someone I know, someone who knows how I work. This is good. Then the rest of the cast went pretty well. Pinky Rose is Pinkie Pie. She was also supposed to voice Fluttershy, but the timeline didn't line up for that. So I got Starry Flame. I got the last narrator as Applejack, because of course. And it feels a bit like weird to get last narrator and not Magpie, because they literally record their things in connected rooms. So it made the most sense to go with Magpie. There's a 5th name, but I had to crop it due to controversies. I would like to apologize for that. I didn't know at the time. Sorry about that. But that's life. If I had the gift of insight, I would have gone with someone else, but that's the thing. Yeah. Part 7, music. Yeah, that's part where I praise Blue Brony. I'll actually cover it a bit later, but I want to, when I cut out the sound, and just show you the visuals, because he did a music video for OK, the song that he has for the credits, because the credits, he made a song with lyrics. I ended up with the instrumental because I thought it felt a bit more fitting for credits, but he decided to record a music video and just to show you the visuals of the music video, at least for the first part. Because you start with, I was thinking at first, okay, he's gonna just go with visuals for missing out. And no! He recorded the music video in a church.
Wait, what?
Yeah! I was thinking, are you crazy? I was thinking, okay, maybe if he has to record something, he might record in his recording studio, something very simple. So you know how that depth of field is very shallow? It makes a very nice bokeh that separates the subject from everything else. You don't get that of a phone. He actually had a professional camera to record that. He did that without even telling me. I had the surprise. That's the level of dedication he has. His craft is incredible, and I feel so bad he couldn't be here for Ciderfest. He had a great opportunity for something else, and the timing was bad. But since we have the recording, can we all say hi to Blue Brony?
Hi, Brony.
So, and I'm gonna cover him again a bit later. So, return to home. And the whole idea is that one of the things I wanted to make sure is to establish the idea that, you have the scene where you have Twilight and Starlight with a confession. And the whole idea is that you have Starlight returning back using the feature of the spell where she can go back to where she was before to basically undo that timeline. In my theory, the timeline she created where she changed the things basically just a separate branch. I don't want to claim that the whole thing was destroyed, but she goes back to her timeline where things go well. But how do I explain that without having someone explain all of it in detail? Because in time travel movies, the more you explain, the worse it gets. And one of the key ideas I was thinking is, well, I have the scene where you have Starlight that kind of feels out of place. What if I re-render the exact same scene, but Starlight is gone? Like, everything else is the same without Starlight. And then the idea came, well, I could just go with that and that's it. But, well, I have that scene that I have where you have Starlight who's walking. What if I... Whoop, she's gone. And then the idea came because around the time I was deciding that, Blue Brony sent me some music. And the whole idea is that it was the music to introduce the holographic tree.
It's your price.
And I was testing it with the music with the whole thing. I think I'm gonna cut a bit because for time. But the whole idea is that I realized while I was doing that, I was doing some tests with some very, very early tests of those scenes with the exact music, and I pointed out to him that would be perfect to reuse that same arrangement for that scene. And I think he just turned to me and just said like, yeah, let's go with that. And he made a slightly different arrangement for that one. So the whole idea was let's do a montage where we celebrate all the things we really enjoyed. And I was kind of scared because it's taken like I don't want to make it pandering by saying, hey, remember that thing that people liked? So I also took some elements from an episode people didn't like as much, but still have some sweet memories. And the whole idea is doing that kind of that amount of shots very quickly with the amount of assets that had to be made. Because I was thinking, there's just a scene that lasts 2 seconds. How do I make it in a way that's budget conscious? So the first two are clips reused from the Fall Sunset Shimmer with some improvements. The third one is basically just reusing the model they had for the Twinkling Balloon. Yes, that's the name they actually had for that one. And basically some clouds. And basically that one was pretty straightforward. Fourth one is reuse a model that I had for Luna's Determination, the background model. Fifth one is reuse cycle for Celestia walking in celestial plane from the beginning of Harmony. Sixth one was very complex, trying to do an explosion for the Golden Library. Until I realized while I was looking back at the clip that you only see an explosion pasted on top of the tree. You don't actually see the tree explode itself. So one of the things I did was basically do the same thing, but just to show that the pressure, I just had an alpha mat, basically just having some slices to show that the wood was buckling and some light would be coming out of it. And then I just had some displacement to try to make it look like it was blowing up. And then I had some explosions added on top, affecting the glow. Seventh one from Fall Weather Friends was basically just lining up a bunch of trees to try to replicate it, and then I had the run cycle. Then the gala was quite interesting. I was thinking, well, I want to look back at the past. Could I replicate the donut shop in Blender, but not in current Blender, just the old Blender? So I had to replicate it and then put the characters in, and then learn back that old software because the old Blender was weird. It was really interesting as a look back to compare how the software changed since then. The other one was basically just redo of something I had from Project Undercloud with a model that I already had from the Fall Sunset Shimmer. Then you go with the model that the Hall already had with the characters, and I was really glad that I already had the vector for the stained glass for that one scene. Magic Duel was interesting because I had to do the dome, but I had to curve it to look good in the screen, so it's basically just a pane of glass that's curved, and you don't see anything else outside. Then you have a bridge already had for Magic Duel. Then you have the scene that I reused from that one scene with Sonic Rainbow. Already had the Golden Library, so adding rain was not too much problem. Then you have the clip from Solidarity, where I took out some characters that are not matching the timeline. The weird, the Tree of Harmony was interesting because it's literally just a vector that I just extruded and I had some reflections on it. The Discord rig was basically just something I had for an old Discord PMV that never happened. The wedding is basically just putting a carpet on the floor and just hoping that things would go well. Winter was reused of the winter model I had for Ponyville for the credits. Gala is basically the same scene I already had but without Starlight. And the funny thing is for the Swan of the Century, we're heading the bites. I was thinking I'm not going to be able to model a house with bite marks from those things. So the bite marks was basically added on top by just using the Roto tool in After Effects. So a lot of things, it doesn't feel too overwhelming if you know what you're doing. And it really helped to get that montage and actually make it fit with the beat of the song. And having the beat of the song already set in stone really helped me to know exactly when to stop, because I was thinking like, you don't want to push too much, but you don't want to have something underwhelming. So all of it actually worked. So changes along the way, because you might start with a script, but for even in big movies that actually know what they're doing, they're going to have changes along the way to make it good. And sometimes they're going to make mistakes. So, for example, I had a whole monologue that he had with Starlight at that scene, and I recorded it with Anna Chloe, and I wasn't too sure because you don't really have inner monologues on the characters in the show. I was thinking, well, it's not the show, so it's not the end of the world. And I was realizing, like, a lot of the things she talks about the mistake and the archive, a lot of it is already explained in a scene later or the scene before. So it was very redundant. And I think just having her just contemplate it without any words worked perfectly. I already had also added that insert because the whole scene with the ponies asking about Zekoro is interesting, but I felt like we couldn't actually see just the idea that Starlight was going to go make mistakes or let mistakes happen in a more physical way. So actually seeing the ponies touch the poison oak was so much more interesting visually. Funny thing is, Apple Bloom in that shot, I needed a walk cycle where she's a run cycle where she's looking around. It's actually the animation for Celestia from the beginning of Harmony when she's about to see the newborn Luna around everybody else. So I was thinking, like, I got that kind of trot cycle. Let's reskin the model for Apple Bloom for that one shot, and it worked. And then everything else was mostly just cheating with the time I had. And the scene is basically that's why you don't have Starlight talking in that scene, and I think it helped really well. I had this bit. I already had the sugar cube corner model already there, so just recreating the scene where you have Twilight talk about the parasprites, and then just having Starlight in the back, just looking, just confused, and also she already knows what's going on. So it was pretty easy to make, and I was thinking like I need a bit more examples of Starlight having to force things, Starlight having to let things go, and still feeling the pain of letting those mistakes happen. There is what's this one? Oh yeah, this scene, it was quite interesting because the idea I was thinking is we never actually have a scene where it goes from outside the Golden Gold Library to inside. I was thinking that could be really cool because we're in 3D, we can actually fly the camera around, but one of the problems with the Golden Gold Library that is pretty obvious if you look at the show for 15 seconds is that the interior of the Golden Gold Library is absolutely bigger than the outside. I was thinking, well, I would love to do it in a way where you actually feel like the magic is going on, like this, like you want to look at it and feel, oh, it's just, it looks smaller on the outside. But no, actually the trick I had for this one was, so I basically built the model, I took the model I already had, I chopped up the outside, and I put the model of the inside, and if you see the gray square here, the whole thing is that basically it's a gray square that was filled with the background behind the Golden Oak Library. And basically that way you wouldn't see what's behind that. And with the perspective just right, you wouldn't notice the trickery. And so, the whole thing is that while I was working the project, one of the things I realized is, at first I was thinking about Starlight in the story because I joined the fandom in 2013, but back then it felt like I was late to the party. There was a lot of things that were already made. They already came up with Discord, a lot of cool songs in the fandom. I felt like I joined in late at the first BronyCon I was. And while I was working the story, I had that moment of realization that Twilight also had that thing happen, and that's where you have the monologue of Twilight mentioning all the things she missed out on. And it was very interesting as a change of perspective to look at myself through that, because it's a very good learning opportunity in terms of production, but also in terms of myself. It was very interesting as self-discovery. And, I'm talking about that, but what's next? And do you want a preview of my next animation?
Yes!
So I'm very glad that we have a very, very powerful speaker set here, because Seth sent me a clip of Bright Eyes of the Thunderclouds with the sound mix, and it's incredible. Where did I put it again? Should be in desktop.
Give me your buckets. Reporting. Is something wrong?
No. Yes. I need you to take this letter to Twilight Sparkle in Ponyville right away. This is an emergency. Equestria depends on it.
I will do what I can.
You have to do your best.
Ponyville. Well, alright then. Hope the train doesn't get delayed again. Don't do this, sis! Seriously, Edgar! I have to do my best. It's the only way. It has to be. Surely. We'll try. That won't work. What?
I'm afraid you won't be able to qualify for the Wonderbolts Academy due to your condition.
But why? I thought you said it was all about having great wings and doing our best.
I do not make the rules. Those flies are the best of Equestria, so they have to be strict.
There has to be a way to let me in. I'll work extra hard.
And the first Wonderbolt is for business. Is it record shattering? Ponies will think you got it out of pity. Oh, I don't know. Maybe you'll change their minds if you manage to ride a thunderstorm.
I never liked it.
Come on, snap out of it! Celestia needs us!
Just got word from the Cantaloupe Weather Patrol. This weather wasn't part of their schedule. We might be under attack. We have to contact Twilight and our friends right now. This isn't working. If I may offer a suggestion. Miss Muffins, the princess requires your service.
The princess needs me. Equestria needs me. Dinky needs me. I can't. I'm a failure.
Yes, you can, Derpy. Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Are you excited to see next the remaining?
Ooh, yeah.
It's gonna come soon.
Ooh. Let's go.
As an aside, Brittany Ackerman, who voiced Derpy, she's here, so could go say hi.
Oh, snap.
Buy stuff from her.
But how much time do we have?
2 minutes.
Okay, do you have any questions? I was expecting.
Yeah, why muffins?
Okay, well they said it as muffins in the show, and I was thinking like, it's kind of cruel to name a child Derpy Hooves.
Yeah.
The controversy over that name, bro.
But although in the final animation, there's a bit of an explanation for why she's called Derpy Hooves. If she's named Muffins anyway, I don't want to spoil it yet. It's gonna make sense, and it's gonna contextualize a bit more her presence in the last roundup. So, and I felt a bit bad with that, but I think it makes a lot more sense in that kind of context for a story. So I would like to apologize for that first because the original project Undercloud set Derby Hooves has her name, but a lot of things changed since, so things are like that. Any other question?
How long roughly did it take to figure out Toon Boom?
I'm still figuring out right now.
I mean,
I did have a starter with Toon Boom before the production of Luna's Determination, but at the time I was thinking like I don't want to. I was thinking it's going to be very scary to jump right into it, so I was sticking with Flash. A lot of it also came down to the fact that I already knew a lot of things with Toon Boom, with Flash and a couple of other software. For example, Nuke. Nuke is basically that kind of node-based approach where you basically plug nodes together with some kind of spaghetti. Just that unlike Nuke, what Toon Boom has is that they have green and blue inputs and outputs. Blue are for visuals and green are basically for positions. So for example, if you have a piece of limb, you're going to have as a blue output what it looks like, and as a green one, for example, you're going to plug the input. For example, I could plug the limb it's connected to. So if I take that one and just throw it around, the other piece is going to follow around. And once I figured out that part, everything else just lined up. Deformers, what you do is that since it deforms a position, you plug it at the green input for that. And then you could input, for example, a peg if you want to fly it around. You have shake nodes, that is basically just a peg with shake enabled, and then you can tell it what kind of range, what kind of speed, what kind of octaves, for example, because you can have a more complex kind of shake. A lot of it just came down to that. You have output nodes, for example, you take the output of that limb, for example, and you export it as a separate thing. It's very effective, for example, if you have a model of a character who's, I don't know, she has her hooves on a piece of furniture and you want it layered above it, but they're rendered separately, so you're going to have the piece of limb that's a separate export, and then you can just layer it above in the compositing. A lot of it just came down to figuring things out that were just obvious, but not of the thing that was expecting Flash to be able to do. And then you have the timeline that basically behaves like the one in Flash. So a lot of it was easier. I think I completed the False Sunset Shimmer in about 11 months. I could have done it faster if I knew a bit better the tools. It also helped that while I was working on Luna's Determination, I already had some stuff in Toon Boom that's working on the side. And it's kind of the truth with this project. Like right now I'm working on the next project while this one is getting completed because there's a lot of stuff that is outside of my control. For example, the sound mix is done by Sapphire Sistrine. Since I don't know how to do sound mix too well, and it's very good that I have someone I can trust for that kind of things. And it's nice that I told myself that I'm not trustworthy enough, that I should just trust someone else instead. So, and yeah, a lot of it just comes down to working projects in parallel. And it's also good because sometimes you're going to work on something for this project that's also going to be helpful for the next one. So, and for example, in that example, the mains you have for Celestia and Luna are just the one in Flash, since Toon Boom actually lets me import Flash models. It's not something that Adobe would like, but
who cares what Adobe thinks?
Yeah, Adobe, one of the things that really frustrates me with Flash is that they made a software that's basically, they wanted to make it the baking soda of software. You could use it to make websites, video games, could make programs, could make cartoons. It wanted to be it was supposed to be just a platform for everything, but since it was trying to be a platform for everything, it became bad at everything. You had very inconsistent versions of Flash Player on different devices. For example, the PSP had like Flash 6 with some features of 7 for some reason. So you could actually play some Flash games on your PSP, but not YouTube. The security was a massive problem, so that's why they didn't want to have Flash on a couple of devices. That's why they got rid of it at the end. But the thing is that by the point where they realized that Flash was not viable as a software for that kind of thing, they couldn't just go back and say, well, Flash is also used for cartoons, so why not just make tools for them specifically? By the time they had that idea, it was too late. People just switched to Toon Boom because it has so much better stuff in it. So,
Does it cost much, Toon Boom?
Not really. Toon Boom is a lot more stable, but it has a couple of issues if you push it too hard. And there's a weird, couple of weird quirks to the way it handles colors. It has index colors. For example, if I have a model that I have for Starlight and her coat is just not the right kind of purple, instead of going to all the pieces and switch this specific purple, I can just take the index of the color and switch it, and everything is going to follow. It's also very effective because one of the things I want, for example, is just the outline of the character and everything else in black. So I can just take those colors and use the basically color override. It's basically a node that takes the image and as an output the same image, but the color has been changed. So I can basically tell everything else is going to be pure black. Although that's what I used before. What I realized later is that what if I just take the outline and set that as black, and then with a subtract node I subtract it to the one that has nothing in it. And turns out that if you do that, you just get the outline and nothing else.
What are your thoughts on Animate CC though?
Actually, Animate CC is literally just Flash with a different name. When they released, when they announced the change, they didn't really have new features.
Oh.
And well, they eventually started making new features, but when they did the announcement, it was basically just a marketing thing, which is pretty weird because you're gonna ask, well, what did you use to make your animation? And then someone turns and says, well, I used Animate, which is the worst name for an animation software. Flash was good because it had, you talk about Flash animation, you know what you're getting. Toon Boom, it's also pretty good. Although Toon Boom is technically the name of the company, Harmony is the product that does the animation. So because you have also Toon Boom Studios, that was kind of like Harmony before. You have Storyboard Pro by Toon Boom, that is basically just the storyboards, and then you can export it to work in Harmony. You have, for example, Moho, that used to be Anime Studio. Anime Studio was also a pretty good name for that, but I think people were not expecting the same kind of output out of it. You have TV Paint, which is also a pretty decent name for software. OpenToonzy is kind of lame, but I don't blame too much Studio Ghibli for going with that name, because I guess they realized, well, we gotta open source it, but let's not care too much about the name of it. But I'm not gonna criticize them too much since it's not the commercial product. And yeah, just calling it Animate was just the weirdest decision. I think what they were looking at is, let's name it for what it is, an animation software first. And then they didn't think, well, why not call it Flash Animator? But Adobe is very good at making bad decisions. For example, their stance on AI, or the fact that they said, like, artists should expect other people to jump to AI or they're gonna suffer. But yeah, that's one of the problems that. Any other question?
Even more leads into Adobe pirate Adobe products.
Well, you could go sailing.
Thank you.
So I don't want to take too much of your time for that. I hope you enjoyed the preview. It's going to get released hopefully this month. I don't know exactly how long the sound mix is going to take to complete, but we're really close. Like, all the animation is fully done, and we're really very excited to show it to people. So thank you for your time, and enjoy the rest of the con.